to Savage Minds. I'm your host, Julian Vigo. Today's guest is Haim Bresheeth-Žabner, a filmmaker, photographer, and a film studies scholar and professional research associate at the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS. He's the editor of The Gulf War and The New World Order. His films include the widely shown State of Danger, a documentary on the first Palestinian Intifada, and London is Burning, after the 2011 riots. He has written in the Israel Haaretz and the Cairo-based Al-Haram Weekly. His latest book is the novel Jaffa Blues, currently being prepared for publication. The novel deals with life in Jaffa during the late 1940s to the mid-1950s through the eyes of a child of two survivors of Auschwitz. Before coming to the University of East London, Professor Bresheeth was Dean of the School of Media, Film and Cultural Studies at Sapir College, Israel. He founded and chaired the Sderot Cinematheque in southern Israel and its Cinema South Film Festival, still running successfully today. In 2001, he was chair and writer of the Special Report on Public Broadcasting in Israel, commissioned by the Ministry of Culture and Sport, and published in 2001, with the government accepting all its recommendations only to avoid putting them into practice. In 2010, he set up the Museum Integrated Digital Archiving System at the University of East London, a center for high-resolution scanning of artworks, which can be gleaned on Midas. His latest book is An Army Like No Other, How the IDF Made a Nation, published by Verso last year. His latest film is in post-production, The Mind of the Occupier, about Israel's occupation of Palestine. I welcome Haim Bresheeth-Žabner to Savage Minds. We've known each other since 2003.
In Surrey, I think.
It was 2003, the summer, Cyprus. And that first day I met you at that conference, it was an evening, I think, when we started talking. You and Josefa were talking about what I should expect or not expect as well. It was my first time to Israel, and I was about to embark on field work. And I tell you, my first instinct when I got to Israel, it hit me right at the airport. It was when I was put into, everything was there but the lamp shining on me, but I was put into a several-hour interrogation. My hair was styled, I went through a Pippi Longstocking phase, and I think they were fazed by the fact I had a professorial invitation to come to Israel to do research, and I looked like Pippi Longstocking. Anyways, I was sitting at this desk of an interrogator asking me what I was doing in Cyprus as he informed me, you know, the last suicide bomber we had here was trained in Cyprus. And I said, well, I am so sorry about that. I did not know that, but I can assure you I was at, and I pointed out the two conferences. I still had the brochures in my bag. And they kept me there until I arrived around 1 a.m. I didn't leave the airport until about 4:30 in the morning, 5.
You never told us that.
I didn't tell you that. That's true.
No.
It was actually a very small pimple in what I experienced there, because I had to go through many mahsam. That was shocking to me. Within less than a month, I was in a state of fear whenever I had to go through them, because there was so much, and I don't want to overuse this word, but in the very basic sense of the word trauma, there was a lot of trauma associated with this, because you could see people. I made a film. I snuck a camera into my shirt and I filmed a mahsam because people would not believe it, and I realized I had to film it. So I turned it into a short film. And the things that people were carrying with them, 2 men carrying a carpet, a woman carrying an infant, and 2 other small children, plus her weekly groceries, on and on. Because I refused to take the Egged tour buses, all those Israeli buses that would take you from, let's say, Jerusalem to a settlement. So I traveled with the collective taxis that were inevitably stopped every so many kilometers by a destroyed home that had been bulldozed, and you'd have to walk through or walk around the ruins for anywhere from a couple minutes to 10 minutes and go through this long process. And that is when, going through one of those one day, I thought, well, I've been so lied to by my government, by the media in my country. As a North American, we are not told anything near the truth about what happens in Israel. Now, that was 2003.
Don't say we didn't warn you.
You did. You totally warned me, and I totally was not prepared. Chaim, when I met you, I'd already been threatened by terrorists in the Andes, people with whom I actually politically sided, the Sendero and Tupac Amaru. I had taught all over South America. I had hitchhiked to include in a Peruvian army tank and all sorts of farmer collective hitchhiking. I'd seen a lot. I had not seen that. I totally got it when I would see the comparisons made by Israelis like yourself and others, including Palestinians and people who've lived in the West Bank and Gaza, who would make the comparisons to apartheid South Africa and more. And I'm wondering if you might take our listeners through. Let's begin with how you came into this world, because you were not born in Israel, Chaim. Can you tell us about your beginnings as a soon-to-be Israeli citizen?
Well, I was born actually in a refugee camp because both of my parents were survivors of Auschwitz. They spent their few months between June of 1944 and the evacuation of Auschwitz by the Germans. And both ended up in what are called Fußmarsches, but they are death marches. My mother to Bergen-Belsen, and my father to a place called Gusen II, which was a sub-camp of Mauthausen and was called by the Nazis the Hell of Hells. And he used to say to me, and I didn't understand it, that Auschwitz was a holiday camp in comparison to Gusen. So they both were freed, my mother by the British and my father by the Americans, in April and May of 1945. And they ended up in Italy and met in Torino. I just completed a novel based on that period. So I hope it can be read soon, and it's a novel. It's not a diary, but it includes quite a lot of this stuff. So they ended up in Torino. They married there and moved to Rome basically to begin with at Cinecittà. And then at a refugee camp in the mountains about Rome, and that's where I was born. So I was born in a refugee camp, and that probably makes me quite capable of understanding the Palestinians.
And it's quite a coincidence also, your having been born in Cinecittà and your work as a scholar and your work as a filmmaker today.
Sure. I don't think that it kind of I didn't get it for many years that it was Cinecittà, but my mother used to tell me that when I grew up, she said, we were staying in film studios for a few weeks until they found a place for us, and I didn't know what she meant. And then I read about it and connected the dots. And I came to Israel in the middle of the war in 1948 as a baby. We were put into another prison camp because that's what they did with people. We were not prisoners, but we had to stay there until a place was found for us. And my father was drafted into the army, refused to fight. He was one of the first refuseniks in Israel, if not the first, and found himself in jail for refusing to fight. And in the end, he ended up as a medic on the condition of not carrying arms. And that's how he survived the war. And then we ended up living in an Arab house in Jaffa. So, the life of refugees are where I come from and where I ended up as a child.
this informed clearly your political perspectives as to what has gone on since 1948 in Israel. Can you explain a bit your awakening to this? Obviously, your father being an early refusenik, how did he frame this to you and your family?
Um, you know, my mother collected all the stuff that was found in the flat that we were placed in, assuming that the owners would soon come back, and she wanted it to be in good nick and nothing broken, nothing missing. So when they come, she can hand it over to them. And that's how my parents spoke to us. They said, "This is not our home." Um, you know, I was then I was alone, but my sister was born in 1950, and even when she was quite small, my parents used to say, "This is not our home. We will have another home sometime." And the people who used to live here, the Arab family that owns this place, will come back one day when there is peace, and we will move to another place. I was very frightened by this, and I won't tell you the whole story because this is not what we're talking about. But the family actually did return for a short visit in 1956, and they sat with us and spoke, and it was one of the events that probably the most influential events in my life. The meeting with that family of refugees from Gaza that we lived in their home for about 8 years.
Obviously, the political situation in Israel is told quite differently if you were to watch your entire life, as I did, let's say North American ABC, NBC television, as opposed to what you were being represented within Israeli media. Was there a lot of media rhetoric to get through, or were there more avenues of getting more accurate information at the time?
There was no accurate information of any kind at the time. This was a very different period, of course. It was a period of a lot of Israel was a collectivized society. It was never a socialist society, of course. No socialist society is built on apartheid, but it was collectivized, and it had a collective mind, and everyone had to bear down and carry the weight that this has brought. And most of the media personnel all the media personnel were from the elite, and they knew what they needed to do. Ben Gurion said in 1950, for the first time, we have a state, we have an army, but we have no people. There's no nation, and we have to create a nation. So this is what I'm speaking about it in the book quite a lot. Basically, you have to create a nation out of a collection of unconnected individuals, and the machinery that Ben Gurion has selected to build this nation was the army, because the army was the single largest institution in Israel. So I don't think that as a child I have experienced the truth breaking out through different reports, and my novel deals with that quite a lot. How difficult it was to work out. It was impossible, actually, for most people, unless you read English, French, or other languages, and had access to a radio and listened to other stations, or even, read papers that were imported very late after they appeared. Most people could not possibly imagine that Israel is the occupying force, that it is the colonial power in the Middle East rather than some kind of victim of Arab aggression. We were growing up as victims. We were told we are victims of the world. First of all, of course, of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, and then because I knew that that was true, my parents were victims of the Holocaust, then people accepted that we're now victims of the big Arab nation all around us, hundreds of millions of people, and we're just like 1 million people in the midst of all that. There were no, there were no refusenik journalists at the time. And even when Uri Avneri started acting a bit more professionally, he never stopped being a Jewish nationalist. Of course, he came from a right-wing movement of terrorists, the Stern Group. And he always was, and he was the only voice against the government, and he always was a bit of a nationalist, and he would talk about personalities that he disliked and their behavior that was dictatorial, like Ben Gurion was definitely behaving like a dictator. So he criticized him and he criticized his party. But he always stopped at that invisible line of we are a nation, and as a nation we have got to stick together. So I am afraid that what you heard in North America is what we heard, a version of that we heard, which was even more intensely nationalistic, settler colonial, and blind to all the enormous damage, death and destruction that Israel has instituted upon the Palestinians and other Arab nations.
Well, let's touch upon the quote unquote victim narrative in terms of it's something that's of great use to people politically today. I see it in many cases in other areas of cultural politics, several cultural wars in vigor at the moment within the West, especially the gender wars. And I find it fascinating how claiming victimhood becomes this way of silencing your opponent, and you somehow automatically win the argument. You don't have to have a debate. You can no platform the other, because the very idea of asking me a question means you must want me dead. I'm giving you an example from the gender debate. But what's interesting is that many of our listeners may or may not know about proposals that were given to create Israel in other parts of the world, such as in Australia, in North America. Now, there are people on the left who believe that this was a politically strategic choice. Hence the problems we are living today as a world populace, especially those in the Middle East, especially Palestinians and Palestinians in diaspora. What do you think about how the creation of Israel is linked to Israel's current and long-standing maintenance of the strongest army in the Middle East?
Well, there was no need to create Israel in order to resolve the refugee problems at the end of the World War. America took very few refugees. Britain took even less. So if it was necessary to resolve this problem, they could have easily been divided between those nations and others, mainly in North and South America and some in Europe, without the need to dispossess a whole nation of its home and the destruction that was connected to the Nakba. But of course, those people who ruled Britain, who ruled the United States, Canada, Australia, etc., were not exactly open to Jews coming in. In 1938, there was the first refugee convention because of the problems of refugees. Many of them were Jews, of course, who ran away from Austria and Germany and even Poland because it was a fascist country. And so there were 500,000 refugees in Europe, and the world knew that it had to be resolved. And a convention was called in Evian in France. And the famous words, each country had to say, we will take X refugees and we will take Y refugees. It was alphabetical, and Australia came first. And when the Prime Minister of Australia spoke, he said, Australia cannot take any refugees, not one. This was the quote that everyone knew, and that's how it started. And after that, it became even worse. So when it came to the United States and the UK, they didn't have to say not one, but they said they won't take refugees. That meant that after the war, that was taken as a baseline. They will not come to our country. And those two countries took very few refugees. However, they had important interests in the Middle East. Britain was ruling Palestine as the basis of its power in the Middle East. And it enabled Zionism in its 30 years to make sure that it continues to control the Middle East through its power bases in Cairo and in Jerusalem and in Baghdad. This was its basis for action in the Middle East. France had a similar northern flank of the Middle East, Syria and Lebanon, etc. So there were interests for continuing the Jewish occupation of Palestine and its installation as a state rather than just a community without powers. And in the end, the Americans also supported that for their own reasons, and we can see that support continued until today. Israel is, of course, the country getting more financial support than any country in the world since 1948. And actually, it gets more support than the rest of the world put together, this small stretch of land in Palestine. And it is, without that support, one of the richest countries per capita in the world. So you have to ask yourself what was behind that. And what was behind the creation of Israel was a control of the Middle East. And you could not control it through Arabs in government, because the Arabs were already up to the tricks of the British and the Americans, and refused to play their games in different countries, and were fighting that control quite effectively. At the same time, Britain was ejected out of the bases along the canal, and that's why the 1956 war happened. So there's Israel was a flank of world imperialist forces and stayed that, and it's an agent of those forces, a very effective agent, one has to say, always to be trusted to do what it needs to do, though sometimes it acts a bit independently in its own interests more than in the interests of its masters. So this is not quite a dog wagged by its tail, but it's the tail is quite powerful. Instead of actually taking those Jews to countries that said that they wanted their best interest, this is what they had at heart, the best interest of the Jews who survived the Holocaust, they sent them to Palestine to fight the Palestinians and get them out of their homes. It was a terrible global politics game, which still continues. So Britain has denied, I'm living in Britain, as you know, and I never tire to remind the British audiences that I speak to that it is the British that has caused the problems in Palestine, and they used the Zionists to actually carry out plans that both of them have agreed upon. So this is a long story. It hasn't started in 1948. It hasn't started in 1956 or in 67. It started in the 19th century when Britain was looking for ways of controlling the rest of the Middle East when it was only in Egypt at the time. And this is the result. And we are still playing this terrible game to this very day. Britain is still supporting Zionism with unqualified candor. And doesn't matter what Israel will do, it knows that it will be supported by the US. So this is what we are facing, I think, I'm afraid.
It was very strange for me to witness guards everywhere, military everywhere, with very large weapons that you wouldn't even see unless you were at war. And I saw a scene once where a guard was very quick to turn his weapon towards the child because the child was playing in a way that he felt was threatening. It was silliness. It was playing. Every night, one of the entries to the old city, there's a string of very elderly women selling grape leaves, and it has to shut down by 1800 hours. They were late in shutting down by a couple minutes, and the guards came and kicked over the cardboard boxes upon which they displayed their grape leaves. I witnessed this. Even if someone had overstayed their welcome, according to these guards, these were elderly women in their 70s and 80s. I couldn't believe what I witnessed. I tried to document as much of this as possible, but my everyday existence in Jerusalem, traveling throughout the West Bank, was speckled with incidents like this. I made the Machsam video after my second or third trip in the West Bank because when I saw how long it took to get from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, as an Israeli, as a person taking an Egged bus, that time became 4 hours if you were taking the local Palestinian collective taxis. So I decided to document it so that people could understand, especially in the United States, how much we have been lied to. Because it's not like taking the F train, changing to the Q train, and then you arrive a block away from your work. It's much more like you get out, you have to walk even up to a kilometer. The IDF is full of young kids who have weapons and they freely point it in your direction. I had many of these weapons pointed at me. Once near Jericho at a very high mountain ridge, or going to Jericho, I should say, the soldier had his weapon at me just for getting out and saying, how long more are we going to have to wait? We had already been waiting 2 hours with no movement. And it was very clear they were making everyone wait to annoy them. They tried to raise the patience of people. So your work in your last book, An Army Like No Other, How the IDF Made a Nation, looks at this relationship. Why is Israel maintaining such an army in the Middle East? It's soldiered by largely very young people. Young people, men and women, unlike many countries where women are excluded. But of course, that becomes a badge to wear where you are contributing to your national heritage. How did it come to be that the army in this particular country could become something that more resembles what it was fighting ostensibly against, referring back to Germany of the 1930s and 40s?
Well, an army is basically a large, powerful, lethal machinery of death and destruction used to control land and people. If the army is the army of the people, Ben Gurion, and I spend a lot of this in the book, Ben Gurion used the army to create a nation because it was the only machinery that could do it in his book. And once it's a nation created by the army rather than the opposite, an army set up by a nation, then of course the value system of the army is the value system of the nation. Now, Israel has created an army called the Israel Defense Forces. But as Dayan said, it never was a defensive army, and it was always used offensive in its planning and in its actions. It was an army of aggression rather than an army of defense. So that's the first typification, which I think is important to remember. The second thing is, as an old Marxist, I know and believe that people are not what they think they want to be, but they are what they do. In other words, if you do apartheid, you're a racist. If you are a soldier who is for 11 months on leave, and then 1 month you do reserves, you're a soldier for the whole year, not just for that month. And you said that the army is made of young people. These are the kernel, but most of the Israeli army is reserve. So the reservists are basically everyone in the country, men and women. They are the intellectuals. They are the people who sell in the market. They are the bus drivers. They are the politicians. And they are the artists and the media personnel. There isn't a kind of professional army, and professional army is normally recruited from the lower and poorer echelons of society. No, in Israel, there are many elite units. What are elite units? They are the units where the best the elite of the society is actually serving. Now, those elite units are basically death squads. That's what they are. That's what we call them in other regimes. They kill without any compunction, without any law that directs their activities or limits them, and with total impunity. And this is what the elite of the army, which is the elite of the nation, is doing. So if what you do is settler colonialism, apartheid, racism, killing and mutilating children, women, old men, or young men, young men are not worse than, old men or children, they have a right to live. They are not army. So basically, if this is what you do every day for 3 years when you're a soldier, and then you do it until you're 60 as a reservist, that's what you are. That's what you have become. You might think that you're a professor or an artist, but basically you are a settler colonialist, armed to the teeth. And basically, let us remember that this army is not just, you don't need such a powerful army against the Palestinians. Your question is correct. Why is Israel holding on to this huge army, very powerful, what number 5 or 6 in the world, every count finds that. Israel is running a laboratory of armed against armed resistance. Yeah, this is a huge laboratory. It's the whole Middle East is that laboratory. It has special regions for special purposes where you try out the weapons. One of them is Gaza, the biggest open prison in the world. It's a large concentration camp. Sometimes they move in, but most of the time they control it from the outside. So they try everything from drones to bombs to helicopters to surveillance to cameras. Everything is tried on the Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza, and of course on the Lebanese, on the Syrians, and occasionally on other nations in the Arab East and West. So basically, this is the biggest business of Israel. The biggest business of Israel is based on the IDF. It is the military industrial complex. Um, Israel is not just dealing with getting into your telephone through the NSO, which we read about quite a lot, because it affects all of us. And because personally, if you read my book, you know that they have affected the process of publishing this book. So this is what we all know and talk about nowadays, NSO and surveillance capitalism, and a lot is written about that. But basically, Israel is selling everything from the hardware, the software of death and destruction to every right-wing regime, or any other regime which would buy from it. Last count, 135 countries that we know about, and probably another 20 or 30 that we don't know about. And they're selling training to personnel of police forces and armed forces all over the world, both in Israel itself, but also in situ in the States, in Canada, in Australia, in Britain, in France. You name it, they do it. Israel is number 5 or number 6 arms dealer in the world. No, this is a very small country, tiny. Or I should say state, because Israel is not a country but a state. The country is called Palestine and will remain so. But for such a small state to sell, to export death and destruction in every form, depends on the continuous trying out, testing in this big lab, open air lab called the Middle East. So they can say, as they do always, tested in action. Tested in action means we killed Palestinians with this, or we photographed them with this, or we bombed them with this. This is what it really should read as. And actually, when you think about it, Israel has not been that successful with all that, but that is not also something that people understand in the West. They don't understand that Israel has been quite unsuccessful. For example, in 2006, which I deal with in the book quite substantially, how Israel totally failed in its war against Hezbollah in Lebanon. 120,000 Israeli soldiers with thousands of tanks fighting a few thousand guerrillas, and very committed guerrillas, one has to say, and very inventive. And they lost against them. They had to run away and get the US to get them out in one piece before more people died, both civilians and soldiers. So Israel is not that successful in those military adventures, but it is successful in one thing, and that is the most important one. It is successful in holding on to Palestine through an apartheid system, through militarized apartheid system. And apartheid in South Africa was also militarized. And one of the things I wanted to say, that you talked about the women selling the grape leaves at the gate of the old city. And you asked, why do they do this? And they do it because they can. They do it because we don't do anything outside. They do it because Boris Johnson and Biden and Macron and everyone else who rules the country democratically or otherwise is supporting this atrocious regime. That's why they do it, because they can, and because all their life they were used to be the masters in an unequal society, in an unequal occupation, and they have become what they have done, what they were doing. They have become not the professors and the artists that they think they are, but they are basically colonial settlers, armed colonial settlers, and they display the brutality and the indifference and the denial that is typical of such colonial efforts elsewhere, like in Algeria or in other places. Yeah, colonial settlers are not nice people. The United States and Canada were built by colonial settlers that have basically decimated the population, not decimated, exterminated, I should say, because of course decimated is the Roman for destroying every 10th person, and they destroyed every person practically in North America. We don't know how many tens of millions, but they've destroyed the population. So it's not for nothing that Israel and Americans and Canadians are so in cahoot, because those value systems that emerge from settler colonialism are what Israelis have perfected in the 20th century when other colonial efforts were on the demise.
There are many people who might say, isn't this a bit of hyperbole? I've had people ask me that when I was doing my research. It was on the first female suicide bombers of the Second Intifada. And people would say, well, why are you asking questions about suicide bombers? Why aren't you asking questions, as one Israeli man I interviewed said to me, why aren't you asking about us? He accused me of having Stockholm syndrome. He said, you're in love with your oppressor. And I said, shouldn't we be asking questions about these bombings that affect, obviously, Israelis, especially those living in Jerusalem? Are you not at all interested in finding out why people are so desperate that they're willing to kill themselves, as well as others? And his theory was Stockholm syndrome. Of course, this particular man worked within the rescue teams that would come to clean up the dead. He was discussing one of the most recent bus attacks, detailing the pieces of bodies that he and his team had to clean up. What is the mechanism that allows Israelis in so many numbers to live daily with the knowledge that they're supporting a system that is quite repressive? When I saw my first map that was handed to me by B'Tselem with all the checkpoints, all the settlers' colonies and so forth, it's very clear why you can't travel very far in the West Bank without being stopped. There are now settlements everywhere. There are a lot of questions that are left completely unanswered to the foreign press, but are Israelis really so uninformed? Or is this just an excellent exercise of propaganda within, let's say, the school and media sectors?
Well, I think it's, of course, starts at preschool and continues through the school system. And Professor Nurit Peled El-Hanan has written an excellent book about the othering of the Palestinians by the Israeli school system and the build-up of hatred towards the other in Israel. And it goes on in the army. And of course, in the school system itself, you train for the army. You do arms training, you do different types of training. So when you actually come at 18 into the army, as a man or a woman, you are trained. A lot of time was saved, so you can actually start acting almost immediately as an oppressor in that service. But this is not just a system of propaganda. As you said, your example has proven that this man that spoke to you about the Stockholm syndrome believed in this because of a very complex system that is not just the army and education, but for example, the place of religion, the place of the Bible in Zionist preparation of the colony before 1948. Zionists were mainly non-religious people or even anti-religious people like Ben Gurion. But they would use anything to gain what they needed. And they used religion, and they mainly used the Bible. Now, the Bible is, as we should know, but most people don't because they don't read the Bible. The Bible is the most sold book in the world and the least read book in the world, I should think. So if you read the book of Joshua, which is 26 chapters of blood and destruction of all the 7 peoples of Palestine, there are more than 7 actually. If there are 11 instances of, total genocide in Palestine carried out by Joshua and the Israelites. Now, fortunately, we are wiser than just believing to words in the Bible, which is an ideological text, deeply ideological text, and written about 1200 to 1500 years after the purported events have happened. So this is not kind of journalism or even literature written at the time. This is ideological literature written a millennium later. But what is the meaning of the book of Joshua? The book of Joshua is a justification of racism, of apartheid against the non-Jew. Now, that is a very, very terrifying thing to realize. And but, I haven't realized that until I left Israel. We studied the book of Joshua, like all the books, or most of the books of the Bible in Hebrew. And in the description, in those 11 instances of genocide in the book of Joshua, not only are all the fighters killed, executed, but also the men, women, children, old people, dogs, cats, horses, and donkeys. And the dogs, In other words, everything that moves, everything that lives has to be killed in those towns that are taken by Joshua and the Israelites. Now, this is the model that the Zionists have chosen when they started building their army and when they started building the population center in Israel. So you are talking about a mindset which is even worse than that of the North American, the Europeans coming to North America, and destroying the native population, sometimes as a result of not understanding what they find. After all, it wasn't, it was the 15th century. They didn't quite know where they're coming and what the conditions are. This is not true about Zionism. Zionism is a late colonial enterprise. It learned from all earlier colonial enterprises, and as opposed to many colonial enterprises, it is a settler colonial enterprise, like that in the United States, Canada, or Australia, where the population had to be exterminated or got out. Most of it was exterminated. So basically, if you build your understanding of your historical role on the book of Joshua and on the Bible, you don't end up being, a faint heart liberal. That's what happened to Israeli society. So the guy that turns the old woman's tray at the gate is quite clear that what he has to do is get rid of as many Arab Palestinians as possible. Now it's possible to only kick the tray or kick the face of the woman or shoot the child, and a lot of them still are left. So it's, if you want, it's done in stages. This is how Israelis are treating Palestinians. Palestinians have no place in Palestine, a place they came from, and that is called after them and has 4,000 years of history of Palestine and Palestinians in Professor Noor Masalha's recent book about the history of Palestine. No, they are negating the history. They are ahistorical. They are also negating Jewish history in Europe, Jewish history in the Americas, in other places, and of course in the Arab world. So this history is denied. History of Jews living in peace with Muslims and Christians in Palestine for 2,000 years until the Zionists appear, with the only exception, of course, being the Crusades. But the Jews, Muslims, and Christians in Palestine experience no racism of the kind that Jews experience in Europe. Nothing even reminding us of that, and not talking about pogroms or anything like that. So Jews living in the Arab world on the whole lived as citizens. They might not have been equals, but there was nothing of the hatred that they suffered in Europe and the destruction in the end. So all this is denied in the interest of control, in the interest of clearing Palestine of its population. So when you only kick an old woman because you can't kick kick her all the way out, this is part of the process. It's a debilitating process intellectually, because you become a stranger to human emotions. You become a stranger to your own behavior. Grown-up men grabbing little children and beating them, in some cases to death. Hundreds of children were shot and killed in the first Intifada by fathers of children as well. So these were called young men, the children of 12 or 14 in Hebrew press are called young Palestinian men, while the people killing them are called our boys. So these are systems of building a relationship to the other, which is murderous, which is enabling those atrocities to continue. Of course, normally people will not leave the university job. Someone like me, leaving the university job, going to the West Bank or to Gaza and shooting at children. But that's what Israelis have to do. They have to every year leave their job and do that. And they are getting it normalized into their system, or they get normalized into the machinery that needs to do it. And Dayan was very, very clear about that. He said once in 1956, we are a generation that settles the land, and without the steel helmet and the cannon's maw, we will not be able to plant a tree and build a home. Let us not be deterred from seeing the loading that is inflaming and filling the lives of hundreds of thousands of Arabs who live around us. Let us not avert our eyes, lest our arms weaken. This is the fate of our generation. This is our life choice, to be prepared and armed, strong and determined, lest the sword be stricken from our fist and our lives cut down. This is very important. It's a matter of choice. Israel could have had just peace with the Palestinians 1,000,000 times. It chose not to do it because it chose to control them by force, to deny them rights, to treat them racist with racist abuse, to make sure they have no human rights, political rights, property rights, education rights, health rights. Any rights are denied to people under occupation. This is what they have chosen because they are strong. And when a whole nation chooses this, and when no one is allowed to stand up and say, this is apartheid, this is racist, this is colonialism, and after a while, the regime manages to silence everyone. We've seen this in different regimes. Of course, the most extreme was in under Hitler, but we've seen it in the Soviet Union. We've seen it in America during the late 40s and early 50s. This is not unique to Israel, this machinery of subduing the population into fulfilling an unjust and illegal political aim.
You're listening to Savage Minds, and we hope you're enjoying the show. Please consider subscribing. We don't accept any money from corporate or commercial sponsors, and we depend upon listeners and readers just like you. Now, back to our show. For those who were born post 1967, for instance, the stories about nationhood have shifted, including the way media in Canada or the US represent your country. And I find it interesting that in recent years, especially since the Obama presidency, the media seems, and I'm putting this in quote marks, seems to be more pro, and this is where the quotes go, pro-Palestinian in the major media in the States, but it's not quite like that now, is it? And also the way in which we're seeing accusations of anti-Semitism being rolled out in the Labour Party. I find this all very strange. On the one hand, I was no ultimate fan of Corbyn for other reasons. But when the accusations of anti-Semitism were charged of him, and I read what was the charge itself, I couldn't square that with reality. What is going on where international actors are supporting the state, and at the same time, what are war crimes, what is apartheid, are not being called out? Then within UK's Labour Party, we're seeing this very strange kangaroo court of anti-Semitism. Ken Loach more recently.
Well, Ken Loach was suspended from the Labour Party in August, and I rendered my resignation from the Labour Party the day after in an open letter to the leader to the Labour Party. 2 years before that, I have reported myself as anti-Semitic according to the regulations of the Labour Party, again in an open letter, saying that as I have always supported Palestine and continue to criticize Israel and will continue to act in the ways which are prescribed by the Labour Party, I'm anti-Semitic according to those regulations, and I demand that an investigation is started against me. This is you normally do this in a letter to the investigation unit, which is what I've done. You write the name of the accused, you write your name, and you give the information. And I gave the information, my books, my articles, my films. These are obviously ample proof for my anti-Semitic behavior. And I ended up by saying that as a son of two survivors of Auschwitz, whose whole family, apart from them, was killed by Nazis, I find the behavior of the Labour Party anti-Semitic in itself, because about 10 times more Jews are accused of anti-Semitism than non-Jews by the Labour Party. I will say this again. The percentage of Jews in the population of Britain is less than 0.5%. Sorry, 1%, less than 1%. Then it's less than 0.5% actually, but never mind. The people who are accused of anti-Semitism until now, the percentage is about 40%. Okay. Now, of course, not all people are members of the Labour Party. Most Jews are not either members or even voters of the Labour Party. They vote conservative in the main. More than 10 times more Jews are accused of anti-Semitism than non-Jews. So this is obviously an anti-Semitic behavior against Jews like me, who are suspected of being anti-Semites because we support the rights of the Palestinians. Now, this is such a travesty, not just of justice, but of logic, that you are right to ask about it. So how does this behave? How does this appear, this behavior? How does this develop? Now, basically, the Israeli Hasbara, the most developed and very well financed system, it's a global system of Israeli propaganda, has chosen the Holocaust as the model of identity for Jews. And it claims to be a state of all Jews. Of course, most Jews had nothing to do with Israel and didn't vote for it to become the state and wouldn't if they were asked. But that's the line that Israel has taken. Now, if you are criticizing the state of all Jews, then you must be anti-Semitic. This is the IHRA definition fruit. The IHRA definition, through its examples, is basically putting the onus of anti-Semitism on people who criticize Israel. So at one time, in the time of my parents, and even now, anti-Semitism used to be, and actually remains, true anti-Semitism, the hatred of Jews. Now, as someone said, anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitic people are those who the Jews hate. This is the change. Basically, if Jews don't like you, you're anti-Semitic, even if you're Jewish, because they say so. And this have become the yardstick to judge many thousands of Jews like me in Britain who were kicked out of the Labour Party. I asked to be accused and waited for 2 years. And when I realized they're never going to do it, I left the party so disgusted after they expelled Ken Loach. And lo and behold, 2 months later, I get a letter accusing me of anti-Semitism, 7 pages of it, and they ask me to defend myself as a member of the Labour Party when I have resigned from that party 2 months earlier after having lost the hope to be accused of anti-Semitism because it took them 2 years. This is the mad system we are now facing in Britain and have to deal with.
Was the latest accusation the one that you had written and they took a long time to get to, or was it from a third party?
I don't know, of course, because they don't tell you. The name of the accuser is kept secret. It's a system of grassing, of course. So I don't know if, but basically, of course, they didn't take my books and articles as examples. They took things that I've shared on Facebook and so on. Most of them not ones that I've written, but ones that I've shared. You know that technology of blaming people through sharing. 7 pages of things, terrible things like sharing, Palestinian websites and so on, that I have done to qualify as an anti-Semite. This is a sick turn of events. And of course, Boris Johnson, who is a Zionist, is now joined by a leader of the Labour Party who himself said that he is an unconstructed and unapologetic Zionist. The liberals have joined in that. They all accepted the IHRA. Even the Green Party, the only progressive party we have in this state, has accepted the IHRA definition. So we are living in very strange times, you're right. But why is this done? Of course, you can't accuse a victim. And if the Israelis are victims, because they are Jews, and because Jews are everywhere criticized, because the state is criticized, and if you criticize the state, which creates new war crimes weekly, then you are anti-Semitic, then you've created a great system. You can't accuse Israel because it's Jewish, and so it says, and it's a state of all the Jews, and therefore if it does something, it does it in defense because everyone else around it is anti-Semitic, including many Jews, of course. This is a world, it's a fictional world, but as we all know, fiction is very powerful in politics. Most politics is fiction.
How is it that the policies that lead to the empowerment of the IDF, the financial support for the IDF, Israeli identity as affected by the IDF, are created by this cousin, the United States, which, as you know, has a huge lobby. One of the things, for instance, Chaim, that made me laugh and cry at the same time was when I was given another book by one of the many organizations I worked with in Israel, that it was about how right-wing Christian groups were giving money to support the state of Israel, because in their minds, when Jesus comes down to earth, that the Christians would get the first seat in Israel, not the Jews. I mean, because their anti-Semitism ran so deeply that they made pacts with the Jews of Israel, the right-wing Jews of Israel, to create money to protect Al-Aqsa for their future, believing that God would see them as the worthy Christians and not the Jews with whom they made these pacts for financial support. It blew my mind, the twisted nature of the financial support.
Well, you will not be surprised when I say that every racist on this earth seemed to be behind Israel. I'm talking about Bolsonaro. I'm talking about Modi. I'm talking about Orban. I'm talking about Poland, Austria, Slovakia. I'm, of course, talking about Trump. I'm talking about Boris Johnson. So basically, every racist leader is a supporter of Israel. And actually, every anti-Semitic leader is the best friend of Israel. Now, this, on the face of it, sounds like madness. Well, of course it is. But this is making a lot of sense in the fictional world that Israel has created around itself in order to protect itself and stay immune to prosecution and to justice, to international law. International law has no teeth anyway. And as you well know, the ICC is not taking any action against Western nations or powerful nations. And even its investigation into Israel is suffering quite badly from threats from outside. And I think it might come to nothing because of that. However, it's okay to blame all kind of African dictators, which they have done, and people from ex-Yugoslavia, which they have done. But these were the only people the ICC dealt with since its inception in 2014. Let's see what it does with Israel. But Israel is best friends with every racist and anti-Semitic leader in the world for good reason. If anti-Semitism is hatred towards Israel, these people don't suffer from it. They are clients of Israel. They buy a lot of arms and other stuff from Israel, like training and NSO services and so on. And so they depend, their repression and their control depend on Israel. And unfortunately, too many states depend on Israel. They don't depend on Israel in the same way that Israel depends on the United States, of course, but they depend on Israel's goodwill. Therefore, less and less of them are likely to, in the UN, take a position critical of Israel. So this has been happening quite a lot. Now, in the case of United States that you mentioned, let's take the last three presidents. Obama, as far as people in my position are concerned, was an unmitigated disaster. He came in with the Cairo Declaration in 2009 and went all the way down after he got the Nobel Prize for things he hasn't done, and for acts he hasn't taken, and for position he has forsaken. So first he got the prize, and then he didn't do the thing that the prize was supposedly for, before the event. And all that he was saying he will do for the Palestinians never happened. And after that, it was easy for Trump to trump him, to actually go one further, move the, this little thing of moving the embassy to East Jerusalem is not nonsensical. It is symbolic. It's saying, you Arabs and Palestinians, go hang. I don't care about history. I don't care about law. I don't care about justice. I do it because I have the power, and I'm going to do it because Netanyahu asks me, and I'm a nice guy, so I'll do it. And then Biden comes and actually continues the line of his ex-boss and his ex-enemy, and he does more or less the same things. For example, instead of helping people who are bombed in Gaza and Jordan, in the West Bank or in Lebanon, he gives Israel a huge injection of cash to defend itself from who? From the people that it is bombing. So instead of, for every Israeli that is dead in those bombings from Gaza, there are between 200 and 400 Palestinians dead. So who are you defending? Who is attacking and who is defending themselves? Who is here the strong party that is actually initiating the murder, and who is the weak party that has no way of defending itself? So instead of fighting to defend the Palestinians, not just with, missiles, but actually with political action, Biden acts to defend the victim. The victim is Israel. Israel is always the victim because it's a Jewish state, and because they've educated the rest of the world very effectively that you can't attack us because we are the victim and because we're Jews. And on the one hand, they rejected 2,000 years of Jewish history, of Jewish culture, of Jewish literature, of Jewish invention, etc. The golden age in Spain was a golden age of Jews and Muslims mainly. The Christians were, of course, not part of it during that period. And you cannot think of the Renaissance without that collaboration of Jewish and Muslim academics, artists, authors, philosophers, poets, astronomers, you name it. So all this is rejected by Zionist ideology and by Zionist practice. But what is taken from this 2,000 years of what they call exile is the victimhood status. This is a very powerful, useful commodity that Israel is holding to. And that commodity enables it to do all the crimes that it does with support from Britain and the United States, Canada, and other countries, and of course the EU. So if you think this is mad, I agree with you. I totally agree that this is very strange that people don't understand that the colonial settler cannot be the victim. The victim is the one that is expelled, that is killed, that is maimed, that is tortured, and that is, losing their home. This is the real victim. The Palestinians are the victims, and other Arabs in other countries, of course. But Israel has managed to bend the ear of the public in those countries with, of course, the support of their leaders. They couldn't do it without the support of the leadership. So it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or if you're a Republican in the United States, you act in a similar way towards Israel. Having said that, the opposition to Zionism in the United States is incredible in the Jewish sector. Jewish Voice for Peace is a great organization. I'm a member of it, though I'm not American, but I'm supportive, so I'm a member of it. And this is an organization that speaks openly, truthfully, without fear, and in opposition to the large organs of organized Jewry in the United States. And people more and more are listening to it. I agree with you that this is not going far enough. It will never seem to us sufficiently far, but it is doing the slow work that was done by anti-apartheid before the victory over South African apartheid. So this is a slow job. It takes many years, and the Jewish state called Israel is much more powerful and has more powerful friends than South Africa, white South Africa ever had. And so it's an uphill struggle. It is going to be very difficult indeed.
What can you say to listeners who are really not aware of the way in which Israel has been set upon the world stage, almost with the end goal of maintaining a constant state of war? To include what you just mentioned with Trump moving the embassy, it's not a coincidence. There's been a long tradition of Israel erasing Arabic names of towns, of streets, and Hebraizing everything. Language has formed the center of Darvo here. It's not only making the Palestinians as our oppressor, it's also making out as if the history was never peaceful. We've always been at war. You know the story.
Well, one of the questions that each of you who listen to this, long talk between us is best asking themselves is why is Israel always involved in fighting? Israel is involved more in fighting than any nation on earth since its inception in 1948. This is interesting when you think about other colonial states. you always find that they are involved in fighting all the time. I mean, the white states of America, before they were independent, the colonies were involved in fighting all the time. They were fighting the people that they wanted to disown and dispossess and expel and kill. Um, and the same is true in Algeria. The same is true in South Africa. South Africa was involved in wars not just in South Africa against the black population of South Africa, but it was involved in Namibia, and it was involved in other places, of course, in Zimbabwe and um, other states in independent states in Africa. And this is a pattern, you know, but Israel has excelled in the years, the 7 and a bit decades since its inception. It was involved in so many wars that when I wrote the book, I had to give up on some of them because people don't even know about this or that war. For example, there was 3 years between 1968 and 71 that were called the War of Attrition. This is a war that Israel has declared on Egypt, and not for nothing that it was called the War of Attrition. And they wanted to basically tire the Egyptians into submission. This meant 2 million people who lived in the cities along the canal were bombed out and became refugees in the rest of Egypt. It meant destroying the infrastructure of Eastern Egypt to a point that even water was difficult to supply to soldiers along the canal. So I didn't even have the space or even the mental space to discuss such minor wars that, though they lasted years, are not even mentioned by anyone outside of Israel or Palestine or Egypt, because people don't know about them. But everything that I said about the other wars is true about those as well. So why is Israel involved in, you know, kind of 24/7 fighting? Well, I think I've already answered this in different ways. First of all, if you're running the biggest lab on earth with millions of people playing their role as victims, and you're testing armaments on them, then yes, you have to fight all the time because you have to improve your products. You know, we are a capitalist society and we have to improve our products. So, you know, like Apple or Microsoft, we have to update our bombs and, you know, missiles and guns and tanks and the rest of it all the time, whether it's necessary or not. But this is the kind of logic of capitalism. You have to innovate and change and invent new ways of killing all the time. So you have to fight all the time. You also have to fight all the time when people who are expelled are resisting. Now, they can't resist with tanks, or they can't resist with you know, aeroplanes. And as you mentioned before, they can resist with their bodies. Unfortunately, that's all they have, and they can blow themselves up. And this is what they've done. And some people in the West, including Cherie Blair, when she visited Gaza, said that if she was in the situation people of Gaza find themselves in, she might have considered doing something like that herself. Not that she wanted to support this, but she said it as a human rights lawyer that was concerned about what is happening. She's not concerned about this anymore because now she is an advisor to NSO, as we found out recently in the new project of the International Journalist Association. So people said this is all the Palestinians can do. The people who are pushed into a corner and cannot do anything, they can't get out. They are with their back to the wall. What can they do? And yet they have the temerity to resist the occupier. This is unheard of. The Palestinians are incredibly principled in terms of not accepting the occupier, not accepting the control of Israel, not accepting apartheid. I'm full of admiration for their ability to stand up against this without anything behind them, without anybody behind them, and with very little support, but from the international community that itself has no fangs. But what we have to realize is that, blowing yourself up is not going to bring the end of Zionism. And most Palestinians understand that.
What is the way out of this? Is the two-state solution off the table? Was that ever really on the table?
Two-state solution was basically a cover-up for continuing the occupation more energetically. It was never on the table. There was never a table. There were never real negotiations. There was a hand forcing by the United States, but never were the Palestinians promised a state in any piece of paper that Israel is signed to. And in Oslo, that wasn't the case, though a lot of people think that it was. So basically, there was never a two-state solution. It was just a slogan that Israel agreed to take at the behest of the Americans, so that people could be bamboozled into believing that peace is coming because we're talking to each other. We're not talking to each other. We were not talking to each other. We, the Israeli controllers, occupiers, racists, not including myself, of course, we're actually telling the Palestinians what we want them to do for us. For example, to use the police against their own people, to use their military organizations, such as they are, which were armed by Israel, to put Palestinians in jail and hold them undemocratically behind bars and without a juridical process like we do in Israel. So first of all, there was never a two-state solution, but people are still talking about it. And even good old Jeremy Corbyn spouted this as if he's never read a paper in his life. And Joe Biden and of course all the others before him continue to talk about something that they know never existed and never will, not because the Palestinians didn't agree to it, but because Israel has never agreed to it. It never agreed to have a Palestinian state. So let's bury this corpse because it's smelly. The other thing is, if I want to repeat this point because I don't think you can say it enough. Anyone waiting for change to happen and looking to the Israeli left is bemusingly devoid of any connection to reality, because there is no Israeli left. There was never a real left in Israel, but there was a left. It was a socialist, racist left, Zionist left, apartheid left, but now even that doesn't exist. So basically, change will not come, and did not come from the settler colonials in Algeria, in Africa, and definitely not in South Africa. It's not the settler colonial society that moves towards change. Never. It does not move against itself. How did change come in South Africa? Millions and tens and then hundreds of millions and then billions of people managed to sway their governments that resisted all calls for years to act against apartheid. The two refuseniks of this were the United States and UK, that under Thatcher and President Reagan stayed until the bitter end supporting South Africa. And then they relented. And then it was possible with the forces of the whole world community and with the ANC that never stopped the armed struggle to bring an end, and I would say a sort of an end, not a real end, to apartheid in South Africa, at least a legal end to legal apartheid, but not an end to apartheid in South Africa. So the first thing to say is that Israeli apartheid, like apartheid in South Africa, is a problem of all of us. It's not a problem of the Palestinians. It's a problem, it's a disease that human society has to excise and to heal. And without the whole of human society, it will not be resolved. And this is what a lot of us are saying now for decades. I'm in Britain saying to British people, you have created the Palestine problem. You have created it. You used the Zionist project and they used you. And together you have created the Palestine problem. Now I'm waiting for you to do your bit. And you have created quite a lot of the problem of the South African apartheid. And you did something in the end, unwillingly and late, but you did something together with the rest of us to end it. There is no way I can see that without boycott, divestment, and sanction of the widest possible, catchment, that there will be an end to Zionism. And what we need is an end to Zionism, like we needed an end to apartheid, to the ideology and the machineries behind it that continue the project of control of a captive and rightsless population is the project of Zionism. If you understand that, you act to end it. To end it in a humane way. It's not the people you need to end. You don't need to expel the people. The Palestinians accept that Israeli Jews are living there and they are not asking for them to leave. Though I wouldn't be surprised if they felt like that after what has happened to them in 70-something years. However, it is the Jewish population of the controlling settler colonial project that is trying to get the Palestinians out of their country. Therefore, anyone wasting time and effort and energy in looking to Israeli society to become more humane is needs help, really needs professional help. That's the only way I can put it.
Is not there a deflection by many Western governments to get into bed with Zionism? When you say Boris Johnson's a Zionist, well, these are political conveniences for leaders. And it also absolves any kind of further understanding of what anti-Semitism meant within Europe's very dark history on this matter.
Why would someone like Boris Johnson care about anti-Semitism, about real anti-Semitism? Why would he? Why would Trump care about it? Why would, most undemocratic leaders in Europe, like Orban and others, care about racism? They are racist. They are actually not ashamed of admitting it. I mean, Boris Johnson was talking in terms which I would not repeat here, but which you are aware of, about Black people and people of the third world in terms that anybody else would find themselves in court over. And, the British society is accepting him as prime minister and as leader. I think that's amazing. I think that's sick, it really is sick and sickening. But, they don't care about this. What they care is the power struggle that they need to run in the Middle East over oil and other things. And Israel is useful for them. If it wasn't useful for them, it wouldn't be there by now. This is what I'm saying. If Israel was not useful to America in its own plans of control, Israel wouldn't exist, because it can't exist without the support of people like the presidents and the prime ministers of the Western nations.
Can there be a just peace in Palestine?
A just peace in Palestine is possible whenever we want it. We, meaning most people in the world, not Israelis and Palestinians only, because the Israelis are poisoned by their own society in ways that we both described. So I think the Palestinians are moving now towards the idea of a one state, which was their position between 1948 and 1988. For 40 years, the PLO and the organizations before it had a position of one democratic state in the whole of Palestine. As you well know, because you visited many times, Palestine is a very small country, one of the smallest countries on this earth, that used to be beautiful before Zionism arrived, and was destroyed in many ways by it. Now, this country was a political unit for most of written history. And it should be one political unit with the same rights for everyone. There are a few problems, though. One, apartheid means that Israelis don't think that Palestinians have rights. Not just the Palestinians that don't have rights since 1967 or 48, actually, but Palestinians who have some rights under Israeli constitutional legislation are losing those increasingly and repeatedly. So I'm saying that the way to resolve this conflict is, of course, Canada. Some people speak French and some people speak English, and most people speak both. That's not a reason to kill each other. Some people are Catholic and other are Protestants, and other are, like myself, atheists, and that's not a reason I want to kill people of faith. And they shouldn't try to kill me because I lack it. So there are examples of societies which are combining different identities, sometimes very different identities, yet they have not become an apartheid society. There might be tensions, and there might be a competition between the communities, but if these are democracies, they continue and they thrive and they become really interesting societies. So there is a solution. The solution was always there. The Palestinians suggested it in 1948 to the UN, and the UN refused to accept it because of international pressure. So if we want a state of all its citizens, there are 14 million people between the sea and the River Jordan. 14 million people. More than half of them are Palestinians. Most Palestinians don't have any rights and never had them since 1948. So easy, the solution is possible. It is a solution which is democratic, which is equitable, in which no one has to kill anyone, but they have to stop killing people, which is difficult for dogs that lived on killing to stop doing it. I accept that. So the international community has to be the guard dog here, so that Israelis have to stop killing Palestinians, because this is what is happening every week and every day of every year. They have got to stop controlling them, and they have to accept one voice democracy. The South African whites have accepted it. They haven't implemented it, but they have accepted it, at least on a legal basis. This is what the Palestinians are now offering the Israelis, and the Israelis have not deigned even to discuss it. This is the only way you can resolve it. Either that or one state, which is an apartheid state from the Jordan to the sea, which is controlled by a racist project of settler colonials, and which will push more and more Palestinians out of their own land by different ways, including pogroms, including mass deportations, which have never stopped since 1948. So this is the story. The story is very easy on paper. How do you push it? Well, how was South Africa's apartheid stoppage realized? By pressure, by global pressure, and only by global pressure, following a period of apartheid being, discussed everywhere, by the disgust that this arises, leading to sanctions, to boycott, to divestment, to political divestment as well, that people stop their relationship of all kinds with Israel, not with the territories under occupation, like the settlements. No, not like what the Europeans are doing. You don't actually act against the soldiers, you act against the generals, the politicians. The settlers are soldiers, they are sent by the leaders. So you act against the soldiers? No, act against the generals, act against the leadership that is settling, against every Israeli activity, financial, cultural, political, industrial, and of course military. All those aspects of Israeli actions should be boycotted, should be academic, for example, artistic. This is what happened with South Africa. You remember the sport boycott was very painful for South Africa, and now a lot of sportsmen in Britain especially are showing a leading role against this. People, young black people, in Britain, like Low Key, from an Iraqi background, are doing great job in actually putting Israel into the apartheid corner. That's what we need. We need to educate the world population. When I say this, I think, God, will we ever manage to do it? But how did people manage to do it in the 70s and 80s and early 90s? They managed to do it about South Africa, and we should manage to do it about Israel. And it's time that we started trying for real, I think.